My name's Vicky. I'm a mental health ambassador for England Athletics, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about mental health. I didn't have the best upbringing. My parents split up when I was 7, and I always felt like I was a bit of a tennis ball between my parents. To cut a long story short, my relationship with my mother wasn't the best, and when it came to going to university, I couldn't wait to leave and get some independence. I went through my university course, and just after I graduated, I was hit by a drunk driver and bent my spine. So I'd been doing a degree in sports and exercise science, and I had to throw the whole thing away and go back home with my tail between my legs and take a desk job. In 2004, I got a telephone call from the local hospital to say that my mum was in intensive care and she'd had an aneurysm. And 9 days later, we had to agree to turn the life support machines off. I hadn't had the greatest relationship with my mum, and I had her friends ringing me and saying, you need to go and apologise before they turn the life support machines off. She basically had an issue with me keeping contact with my father, and it just made life difficult growing up. I was also 37 weeks pregnant with my first child. Fast forward a year, and my dad had 2 strokes. He was in intensive care and they weren't sure he was going to pull through. Then in 2006, on Boxing Day, my ex-husband was arrested on the doorstep and charged with domestic violence, and I was left to bring up 2 children on my own with no mum and no support from anybody. One of those things alone, I think, would send anyone a bit stir crazy. I don't feel uncomfortable saying these words. I think when you've been there and you've had the t-shirt, you kind of find your own way of coping with it. But basically, I had a very long stint of being put on antidepressants, facing the stigma of, oh, why are you taking happy pills? You take pills to make yourself happy. Why can't you just be happy? Why can't you count your blessings? Look at what you've got. You've got 2 beautiful children. Yeah, do you know what? If only I'd thought of that, counting my blessings. Well, in 2012, I decided to run my first marathon. I don't actually know why. I'd done a half marathon, and I thought, well, okay, if I don't do a marathon now, well, I've got 13 miles in my legs. I'm never going to do one. So I set out to do London in 2012. I was a global account manager for Accenture, 2 small children. I did have a boyfriend at the time, but he wasn't all that. So as I'm running across Tower Bridge, I see this rather gorgeous man wearing a local running vest. I thought, oh, he's nice. Well, 2 years later, he was stood on Tower Bridge with my children, and he proposed while I was running. That year in 2014, I ran 57 marathons, and I did it for a charity called Sport in Mind, who use sport to rehabilitate those suffering with their mental health. So we got married in 2015, just after I'd run my 100th marathon. We got married at the Las Vegas Marathon. I'd been well for 3 years on medication, and so we agreed with my doctors that I would try and wean myself off this medication. And within 6 months, I hit rock bottom. Oh my God, absolutely hideous. It felt awful, couldn't stop crying. There was never an issue of self-harm with me. I've never had that feeling of, I'd rather not be here than be here. Possibly, I've got 2 beautiful children that I couldn't bear to be without. But I certainly felt like I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to talk to anybody. If David Beckham had been stood on the doorstep with £1 million, I'd have been like, no, whatever. So I was referred to a psychiatrist who is the chemist to try and sort my medication out. And while they had a sort of play about my medication, they said, we're going to send you to the Priory for daycare, just so we can fully support you and make sure that we get things right. And if you do crash, we've really got the mechanisms there. We've basically found out that my brain doesn't produce serotonin on its own. It's called the limbic system, and while I was off, I was actually signed off work for 15 months, and being a stubborn Leo, if you like, I wanted to know why I was feeling like this. What had I possibly done to deserve to feel like this? And why was I all of a sudden feeling not motivated and just like I couldn't be bothered to do anything? And I read a very good book by Dr. Cantifer called The Curse of the Strong. And basically he talks about the limbic system, and it's a bit like an elastic band. And if you imagine that the high achievers of the world, the big success stories, the prime ministers, the presidents, the Olympic athletes, they're all people that kind of stretch and stretch and stretch that elastic band. And sometimes when we push and push and push, the band snaps. With a little bit of therapy and a little bit of medication, we can fuse that band back together and go back to a nice, healthy, circulating system. But for others, where there's been a trauma or there's been quite a bad break, you never quite fuse that gap, and that's where the hormones can't cross over, and therefore you have a break. So we need to take the SSRI antidepressants to fuse that gap. So all the stigma about happy pills and you don't need this habit to make you happy. I fight for people like that say this, because if you were a diabetic, would you be trying to get off your insulin? If you had epilepsy, would you be trying to come off your medication? And I think quite often people that struggle with their mental health are bombarded with, oh, what have you got to be miserable about? What have you got to be sad about? And why you're taking pills to make you happy. No wonder we've got the likes of the royal family trying to break the stigma, trying to say, do you know what, it's okay to not be okay. I think often people don't like to talk about it for fear of repercussions. There's always the sense of, will I be put in a straitjacket and put in a room full of people licking the walls? Trust me, I've been there. There was no white jackets as such in the Priory, or certainly not where I was seen. There were some very poorly people, with all flavours of mental health issues. But that's just it. It's mental health, a bit like physical health. It can be good, it can be bad. And, what I'm trying to do is obviously break the stigma of talking about it, so we can talk about it just as we would talk about the weather and the news. But to give you some tips on, how to promote good mental health and how to kind of build your resilience, and basically know when that black storm cloud is coming, and not waiting for the storm to pass but learning to dance in the rain. So I started up a running club for non-runners because I found that running helped my mental health. It wasn't so much, I probably wasn't at my best, running 57 marathons in a year, but for that time that I was out running, I wasn't contactable, I wasn't mum, I wasn't wife, I wasn't employee for Accenture. I was just me, and my only goal was to get to the finish. And I think there's something about goal setting and being able to get to the finish and doing it together and knowing when to say, do you know what, I need some help. And there were times on those runs where I thought, do you know what, I need some help, I can't get to the finish. And you turn over your shoulder, there'll be someone else sort of shuffling along and saying, God, this is hard, why do we do this, why are we paying to do this? And we just got ourselves to the finish. So when I came back from my 15-month stint in and out the Priory, I went back to my job, and I just felt like a goldfish. I felt like everyone was kind of waiting for me to squawk or pull a funny face or do something a bit crazy because she was mentally ill. My company were amazing. The support I got when I returned was second to none, but it was my own self-criticism and my own feeling of, I'm not doing this as well as I used to, and I just don't feel like I'm giving this 100%, or that I can give it 100%, or that I'm producing the kind of work that I used to before. And I decided I wanted to go back into coaching. It was obviously what I'd studied for, it was what I always wanted to be when I was small, always happy doing PE, doing sport, anything that kind of got the endorphins going. So I started coaching people to run, and in July last year I actually left Accenture after 10 years, and I now coach non-runners to fall in love with running and use it as a tool to promote their mental health. I also go into schools and I work with vulnerable individuals and I teach them how to use running as a tool. It's not about being the fastest runner. It's not about running a marathon. It's not about, winning sports day. It's just about having a goal and keeping yourself active, looking after your body, looking after your mind. And you know what? Mindfulness, it doesn't have to be sitting in a yoga room sort of humming and chanting and listening to well music. It can just be doing something in like a creative manner, like kneading bread or sewing or cross stitch or gardening, just something that switches off that continuous thought process of the pressures that we put ourselves under. So my tips for improving your mental health, firstly, it's okay to not be okay. Those that are old enough to remember, my mum used to have a pressure cooker, and every night for dinner she would put like the mince and the potatoes or the vegetables in there and put a lid on it and start cooking, and there was a little valve on the top that you had to let the steam out, because if you didn't let that steam out, the whole thing would go bang and you'd have mince all over the kitchen. And it's very similar with our mental health. So we have to keep letting that steam out. When we're feeling a bit pants, we've got to have a bad day. Personally, I take myself back to bed. I wallow in all my woes and I sit there and I think, woe is me, life is crap. I might watch a sad film, or I'll play some Adele, or whatever it takes to kind of let those tears out, because if we don't let the tears out, we're going to go bang. And I spend that whole day just processing it, trying to force the tears out, whatever I need to do to let this sadness come out. And sometimes it's not sadness, sometimes it's just frustration, or it's stress, or just a feeling of like being overwhelmed. But yeah, we've got to have that bad day. Then we've got to start fighting the next day. And you know what, it may take more than a day to get back up to normal, or get back up to what is our level of normal. And I call this my bag of tricks. Now, you can do this for yourself. It can either be an actual tangible box with some stuff in it, or it can be like a virtual list which you have in your head. Some examples, I write down things that make me smile. So for me, it's putting my mascara on. It's a fresh cup of Starbucks coffee. Obviously other brands of coffee are available. It's wearing my best pants every day. Now ladies, you'll get this, men maybe not so much. But there's always that one pair of pants that you keep in the back of your drawer for a date, for a special occasion, the ones that need hand washing, or they're just a bit fancy. You know what? Wear them every day, because life is too short. It's getting sunshine on my face, changing the bed, getting into a bed with nice clean sheets, and so on and so forth. Now, just changing the bed, it's not going to improve my mental health. Let's be honest here, but it will make me feel that much better. Putting on mascara is going to make me feel that much better. Eating a bar of chocolate with a high cocoa content is going to make me feel that much better. But if I work through the list and I do them all, it's going to make a big difference for mental health. And I just keep doing it and doing it and doing it day by day until I start to feel better. One of the key things, and hence why I'm a running coach, is exercise. Now, exercise produces endorphins. I have to run. I have to run for my own mental health. And I've learnt that the hard way. Not to the extreme of doing 57 marathons in a year, but, running makes me feel good. Maybe not while I'm doing it, but when I finish, I always feel good. So I've made it my job. I've made it so that I have to go for a run. And I teach running 6 days a week, more than once a day. And I've done that so that, I can't not run. And, there are times when I turn up and times I don't feel like turning up, but I have no choice. I can't let these people down because they're paying me to be there. So when people say to me, I'm struggling to get motivated, I always find an excuse to, sit on the sofa, watch the telly. I say to someone, do you know what? Offer to give someone a lift. Offer to someone to say, I'm going to pick you up and we'll go running tomorrow. And that way, you won't want to let that person down, and you will make sure that you turn up to running. It can be the same, join the gym, find a gym buddy, ask someone to go for a walk, but get outside, get that heart pumping, release those endorphins, and it will make you feel a whole lot better. As I said, you're not going to change the world just by changing the bed. But if you start to build in stuff that makes you feel better, you will start to feel better. One one thing that we forget, certainly as a mum, and I'm not trying to stereotype or, you know, put certain people in a certain bracket, but as a mum myself with 2 girls, my needs are always bottom of the priority list. You know, I'm guilty of making sure the kids are fed before I am. I'm guilty of, you know, making sure they get a good night's sleep before I do. And sometimes we just have to take that time to be kind to ourselves. And, you know, that could be, you know, once a month booking into a spa, or, you know, just having one night where you go and sit in the bath and, you know, your partner takes over, or, you know, saying to the kids, we're not going to cook dinner tonight, we're going to get McDonald's and we're going to sit and, you know, have a takeaway. And it's about saying, do you know what, it's okay for me. We're often comparing ourselves to others and saying, you know, oh, well, so-and-so has organic food every night, and, you know, we didn't eat our 10 fruit and veg today. But that's okay. And it's about saying, it's okay, it will be okay, and it's okay for me.